Assalamu alaikum, I'm Carl Arundel and you're watching In Focus. Now, I'm delighted to be in the office of my guest today, Lord Swiraj Paul, PC, born in India in 1931, and he's one of Britain's most successful businessmen. According to the latest Times Rich list, he's currently at position number 15 of the most wealthy in the country. He is a respected and committed philanthropist and a passionate Labour politician. In 1996, he became a life peer with the title of Baron Paul of Marylebone in the city of Westminster. In December 2008, he was appointed Deputy Speaker of the House of Lords. In July 2009, he was appointed to the Privy Council. He is a close friend of the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown and his wife Sarah. Lord Paul, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Islam Channel.
Assalamu alaikum, Carl. It's nice to talk to you.
Now, Lord Paul, you've been open and upfront about the claims recently made by you, which you've said, with the benefit of hindsight, you should not have made. At worst, you have said you're guilty of negligence. You've gone on to point out that, and I quote, that before this matter of the expense claims was raised by a Sunday newspaper late last year, that there was no definition in the House of Lords in terms of residence, and a large number of peers therefore fell into an error, as you put it, into an error of interpreting the meaning of the residence rules. There was no guidance on the meaning of main residence until March 2010, and it was finally clarified in July 2010. That is, 10 months after all these allegations first appeared in the press. How many members of the House of Lords, as you put it, fell into error when interpreting the meaning of the main residence, and how widespread was this process?
I think they were quite fairly widespread, but unless it tests it out, there is no way of knowing. And that is why what the Lord should have done is what the Gordon Brown asked the Commons to do, that let us look at expenses of all the MPs. House of Lords should have done that, and they still haven't done that. All they did was the 20 people, mostly Labour or all Labour almost except one Liberal, were complained by the Sunday Times, which was very clear that what they wanted was the attack the Labour because they decided to support David Cameron. So that is not the criteria of taking those people and establishing what was there. That is my argument.
Now, there was a lot of confusion about the sudden publishing of the definition of what constituted main residence. That became available initially in March and then in July of this year, in the middle of all this furore that was going on. And it actually led the Director of the Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer QC, being forced to admit that he could no longer bring charges against anybody for false accounting because of the farcical rules, as he said, set by the House of Lords. A decision that peers could visit their main home as little as once a month, as far as he was concerned, created a very real difficulty for the Crown Prosecution Service. In your understanding, and you were the Deputy Speaker of the House, how on earth was it possible for a definition to suddenly be introduced in the middle of a criminal investigation?
It is rather ridiculous in my view, because how do you determine somebody has slept in his main residence for even one night? I was asked that question. I said I didn't sleep. I could have said that I slept. I mean, to try and just, in some people think, I don't know, nobody goes and checks somebody's bedroom whether he's sleeping or not. It's a very stupid way of defining that one night a month. First, it used to be your main home, you must spend more nights there. Then it changes that you spend one night. Every time they cleared one case, they came out an adjustment to that to clear the cases. And that is absolutely wrong way of doing things.
But some would argue that it's about common sense. If you ask most people what is their main residence, they will have a set of criteria that reasonable-minded people will accept. Well, that makes sense. That's your main residence. That's where all your clothes are. That's where your children come from and go to school. Is that not reasonable to say?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
in my view. I mean, if you have more than 2 residences,
Yes.
what do you call main residence? I don't think I have stayed anywhere where I can say I have stayed the most nights. I have been staying more nights in the hotels all over the world. So, I mean, to define that where you spend your holidays, well, holidays I mostly go out of the country because I rather attend to the business of other countries where during the holidays instead of when the Lord's is in session. And then it also depends how many attendance. I have one of the highest attendances in the House of Lords since 1996. The Sunday Times were comparing me with Lord Ashcroft and this and that, who have hardly attended the House in their history. So how on earth they can compare this apples for apples?
Now, you have said in a published statement that you've repaid the monies that have been part of the whole furore over a year ago when the allegations were first made in the British press, in spite of the fact that you said what you have done was seen to be all right at the time and in keeping with convention. Now, tell me a bit more about this convention that you say existed. I know that pairs, particularly working pairs like yourself, did not receive an official salary despite working full and often excessive hours. Whilst it's common knowledge, Lord Paul, that you are independently wealthy, how are ordinary pairs meant to survive? Apart from anything else, I imagine it gets quite expensive to run a full working office.
Yeah, you see, the Lords are not paid, but my contention was always one thing, that since I came into the House in 1996, I did not claim anything till 2005. Then I decided that I want to select this place to expand this and stay there because it was a complex part of the hotel where I'll have all the hotel services available to me. But immediately the Sunday Times made the allegation. Next morning, I went to the clerk of the house that you make the investigation, and also offered to him that if you want me, I'll pay, I don't need this money. And it took him a week or so telling me that, look, if you want to pay, you pay it. And he also told me you don't have to pay from January 2005 to July 2006, which the whole period was there. Under the rules, you can pay only starting from 3 years from the day the complaint, yes, which I could have paid £25,000, but I told him, I say, I don't want this lousy money. Yes. I want to pay right from the beginning, because if I am wrong before, I am wrong afterwards. It makes no difference whether you this thing. And I sent the check within a week of that.
Yes. Well, look, it's also the case that you'd been in Parliament for, was it 14 years? Yeah. And you'd only made this claim for, a year and a half? Yeah. And that's what the fuss was about, was it? Right. Now, you've explained, and I'm going to quote you again, that one prominent member had claimed £140,000 in overnight allowances for a house owned by his wife's aunt. And as he had explained to a Sunday newspaper, on entering the House of Lords, he had been encouraged by fellow peers to find an address outside London which he could use to claim allowances. He said that it had been thrust upon him because peers did not receive a salary. He went on to say that, and I'm quoting him, if you have been confronted with a situation which you have known all along to be deeply flawed, and you are one of those who has gone along that path because you're not rich, then you get caught up in it. Isn't what this pair is describing the unwritten understanding that the expenses, a form of daily attendance amount, was in fact some sort of salary supplement?
Without any question, that was the impression right from the big time I came into the house. It was well known, and this thing, I didn't want to claim it. I mean, for a few months when I came into the house, I didn't even claim the day allowances. But then your fellow peer says, look, why don't you claim? There is nothing wrong with it. It is a way of compensation. So that was a practice well known. It's just for the individual. And as I said, I only started claiming when I thought and when I knew that I had a house in the place which I can use. Now, they are trying to make out that because I never slept, but who told them I never slept? It's me. Mm-hmm. They were trying to, the Sunday Times was trying to get me to say I have slept. I said, no, if I haven't slept, I haven't slept. I'm not going to tell a bloody truth, a bloody lie for your sake and to make you happy. So that is the kind of ridiculousness, this whole thing. The system is flawed. It has been admitted by the Lord's authorities that it has been flawed. And right from 2009, they have been trying to have had various committees look into this and found it's flawed. And in the end, even in July 31st, when they came out with the solution is very simple, that it is flawed. There is no way of checking it. Best is pay everybody the same, whether they live in London or they live in Timbuktu.
Well, that was all done slightly after the cat had already bolted. They've made their changes now, or at least they're announcing those changes. But there's been what some people have described as a bit of a witch hunt. And there's been people chasing yourself and the other two pairs, Lord Bhatia and Baroness Udin, in particular the Times. On the 12th of October, they published an article in which it was said, over the weekend, it emerged that Lord Paul, a Labour peer, claimed that a flat occupied by one of his employees was his main home, allowing him to claim £38,000 in expenses. The one-bedroom flat was occupied by a manager from one of Lord Paul's hotels. Lord Paul, who has a family fortune of £500 million, has been based in London for 40 years and at the time was living in a London apartment block where he and his family owned property worth £14 million. This article was one of several which dominated the press in the days leading up to the final suspension of Baroness Udin, Lord Bhatia and yourself. The information from which was conveniently leaked from the Lords Subcommittee on Members' Interest, chaired by the former MI5 boss, Lady Manningham Buller, at a time, as far as I understand, when you were all required to adhere to a strict undertaking that no information at any time relating to these matters was to be disclosed to any third party outside the committee. It seems that there was some sort of unholy alliance between certain elements of the committee and the press on this matter. It's even been suggested that there was some kind of vendetta being pursued. Even the final determination on the 21st of October was in the press before it had been debated in the House. What do you think the press has been... Why has the press been so keen to pursue this particular story, and how serious is the issue of leaking?
That is for the press to answer. I can't tell you, but one thing I can tell you, that so much built up the press had for the chairman, Mannix Buller, no-nonsense chairman, head of M15, etc. She has hardly been here for 6 months in the House. What does she know about the practices of the House? First of all, how can somebody sit in that committee without his own expenses fully investigated? Because that's unfair, in my view. And a senior member of the House of Lords. The way it was questioned, I almost walked out of the place because I thought it was highly indecent, highly ridiculous. One member asking 122 questions out of 170 and not relevant to what I never said that was my main home. I said it was a place for me to live, and I had decided that I was going to live there. I was going to upgrade the place. Yes, the hotel belonged to me. If I am not using it, if the manager uses it, that doesn't report to an employee. A manager is a very serious person. Mm-hmm. And I was in no way going to live there forever. I was going to live there in the weekends. So what on earth they are trying? It's a whole newspaper and some of the people in the Lords mixed up together to try and malign me. And that I do not accept.
Now, Lord Paul, you resigned as Deputy Speaker of the House of Lords following that final sanction on the 21st in the House of Lords, and in particular following the revelations by Lady Manningham Buller a few days later in the Daily Telegraph that she had, as she put it, been so furious that she felt that the decision to water down her punishments, and that she felt that she needed to stand down from the committee. That's what she reported. She was adamant, it seems, that a pronouncement be made that all three of you, Lord Berkshire, Baroness Uddin and yourself, had not acted in good faith. She essentially was calling you all crooks. You've since decided to go public about what you have referred to be as being unjustly and unfairly targeted by a kangaroo court, further stating that your faith in the House and in British justice has been shattered. For one of the country's most senior and respected Asian citizens and prominent parliamentarians, the Deputy Speaker of the House no less, to make statements like those, it's a serious business, isn't it?
Oh, it is, and I mean every word of it. The fact you have a committee privileges which you go for appeal. Now, in my view, that the committee of privileges was pressurized, and we heard it even amongst the rumour mill before that she is pushing them to accept all her recommendations in full. Now, the privileges committee heard me. They were very decent people. They said, there is no dishonesty in my case. There is no bad faith. It is negligence. It's irresponsible. Can someone tell me any time in the history of the House of Lords somebody has been suspended for 4 months on those crimes? Now,
on the basis of negligence.
No, if that was so, it was the pressurization by Mannix Miller, which is absolutely undemocratic. You are allowed to go for an appeal to a senior committee of larger number of people. Now, it's like a high court judge giving a judgment, and then if you go to appeal, then he says, I'm going to resign if my judgment is... what the hell is democracy for? Yes. It's a disgrace. So that is why I felt that I believed, even when we were fighting for freedom in India, that there was a sense of fairness in Britain. If there was no fairness, it's only in the colonies. And we believed that. Now, right in the place where democracy is supposed to be discussed, it has been abused. So there is no way I could sit on the woolsack and come to that thing. So, and I wanted to free myself to be able to speak. And once I've resigned that, I have spoken with and I will continue to speak.
Now, I understand that staff members in the House of Lords have written to complain about a conversation which they overheard and which took place between what appear to be senior members of that committee. They allege that the conversation that they overheard proves that institutional racism exists within the Finance Office of the House of Lords. They say that they heard officials gloating and celebrating the success of a campaign to get rid of you three pairs and referring to you all in derogatory tones. Now, these are serious allegations, aren't they? What action, as far as you know, has been taken to investigate them?
I haven't got a clue. I received 2 anonymous letters, which with anonymous letters you really do not know what to do. But it's just for the authorities to look at this. But basically, it's more than that. The authorities need to look at why different peers with even bigger allegations than the money then have been cleared lightly, some with the excuse, including the Lord Speaker herself, who was member of the chairman of the House Committee when she was cleared. I mean, what kind of fairness in that? So that is, every time they cleared somebody, they changed the rule.
Well, you talk about the anomaly here. You said that there were a large number, somehow the majority of which had been cleared by the committee without having to go through this gruesome process which you just described. In fact, I spoke to quite a number of your fellow peers, many of them who are Muslim, some from other BME sections of the community. And most of them quite clearly were intimidated. They'd been approached and felt that they were unable to speak out in defence of any of you in a public place, even though it was obvious that they realised that the treatment that you were receiving was unfair and unjust. Now, one person, Lord Wahid Ali, to his absolute credit, and I was in the chamber myself in the House of Lords at the time, stood up and delivered an impressive speech challenging the whole process, which, to all intents and purposes, initially had tried to force indictments in a criminal court against all three, and then subsequently to impose a suspension and disgrace upon three Asian peers. He mentioned what he saw as the absence of natural justice, and I quote from him, "My concerns," he said, "centre on the procedural failures of the subcommittee, the standard of proof adopted by the subcommittee, and the weight that the subcommittee gave to the information collected by the Sunday Times." He said in particular reference to Baroness Din, although the same applies to all three peers, that the noble Baroness was denied the ability to address the evidence, call witnesses or cross-examine any of the individuals quoted in the Sunday Times, but that they chose instead to rely on hearsay. He pointed out that it was unjust, unreasonable and unfair that any noble lord facing such a serious set of allegations should not be entitled to legal representation and to a process where the evidence can be tested. Crucially, he made reference to the issue of racism. He said, "It cannot have escaped your lordship's attention that the only three members of your lordship's house investigated under these procedures were all Asian." Now, he said, "I have reviewed the list of members, some 20 in total, who had an expense complaint referred to the Clerk of Parliament, and I cannot find any consistent pattern for the referrals. When one combines the inconsistency in approach, the disproportionality of the sanctions, my concerns deepen. Something clearly has gone wrong," he said. He has called for a review. Do you support his call? And should, in your opinion, the review be an independent judicial review?
First of all, I fully agree with what Lord Alier said, and I congratulate him for having the courage to say what all the people should have said, because that is what my faith in the fairness of British system was, which has been shaken. The reply which he got was pathetic. There was no sense which made from the reply we got. All they got was some Indian pair who just started testing out whether you are rich or poor, which has no relevance.
Lady Flagler.
Lady Flagler, yes. Which has no relevance, but that she acts that way. There is nothing as thing. But I fully agree with Lord Wahid Ali. We need to get a proper investigation, but we need a full inquiry, a public inquiry into the conduct of the House of Lords and its officers and why they acted the way. My first complaint, Sunday Times, in one article started with £200,000. Second article, they reduced to £110,000. And third article, they reduced to £39,000. That shows that what on earth they were talking about. In 3 weeks, you don't go down from 200,000 to 39,000. All they wanted was the sensationalism, because I was a great supporter of Gordon Brown, and this was a direct attack on him. And if Lords have fallen from it, it has to be that they have to be ashamed of it.
Now, at the end of June this year, the Lords leader, Lord Strathclyde, announced changes to the expenses claiming system for peers, finally. At that moment, Lords can claim, I think at the moment, Lords can claim £335.50 per day. The Senior Salaries Review Board has suggested a new rate of £340. Is that right? Now, Lord Strathclyde decided on a lower rate of £300. That's what you were going to say? This is 10% less than the current maximum and 12% less than that amount recommended by the SSRB. There will also be a lower rate of £150, at which members can claim if they attend only for a part session in the day. Now, attendance will remain the key basis for any allowance paid. Announcing the changes, though, Lord Strathclyde actually made some quite bold statements. He said, "Axing through the complex current structure of allowances would represent radical change, but I believe that would be right. It would be cheaper to run, less bureaucratic to comply with, simpler to police and far, far harder to abuse." He said, "We would sweep away the controversial rules on so-called second homes, which in my judgment have no logic in a House that is not elected. There will be no more addresses for convenience, no more juggling of utility bills and claim forms. If you come to Westminster and work in Parliament, you'll be able to claim the allowance. If you do not, you will not. The existing expenses regime," he said, "is discredited. It lacks credibility and the public has no confidence in it. This new plan means the end of the second homes fiasco. It means the end of the old expenses regime, and it means a new system that is direct, transparent and accountable. It means we are making a significant step towards winning the public confidence again." It seems to me that he is accepting that their system was completely untenable, and that it seems, and there's a question to be asked, were you three the sacrificial lambs in this process?
What is even more interesting is that, first of all, I still can't work out why we were delayed and put it to the next Parliament, why our cases could not be cleared earlier. And then on June he makes that statement. Then all the 5 members of the committee need their head examined that in view of this statement they even entertain any hearing.
Precisely. Now, isn't it really time that working pairs, such as yourself, I'm not saying you need the money, but working pairs, many that do, should have a proper working salary as their colleagues in the other place clearly enjoy at the moment? That would do away with the need for all this mismatch of a process that they're currently talking about.
In my view, what they have tried to do is, without accepting that, in this £300, whether you live outside, whether you live this thing, they have tried to achieve that in some way or the other. I hope it works. There is already a lot of newspapers are not happy with it. I think we are looking for another time bomb, that some newspapers, in order to criticize somebody, will bring this up. And but the fact is, they are not facing the fact that what should be done, it's every time there is a whitewash, and it is to suit some people. And they need to get more fair, and what process, in my view, what has gone through is absolutely disgusting, disgraceful, and completely lowers the prestige of the House of Lords.
Now, in an article in the Hindu newspaper this week, you stated that the battle is not over and you are not a quitter. Lord Paul, your successful business and parliamentary career suggests to me that perhaps that is an understatement. What are your immediate and long-term plans?
My immediate plans is that we want, and I am very proud of the fact, that we are a great democracy, and this must be kept. The guilty must be punished, but all guilty should be punished the same level and not at the discretion of a small little committee consisting of people who wanted themselves and projecting themselves as the great no-nonsense and great senior member of the House of Lords. Otherwise, why on earth the newspaper was trying to promote them? So it was a self-promotion and leakages there in between.
Lord Swaraj Paul, former Deputy Speaker of the House of Lords and esteemed member of the Queen's Privy Council, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Carl. It's nice to see you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.